Intelligence is one of the most fascinating and genuinely difficult things to measure in the animal kingdom. We've spent decades trying to define it, test for it, and rank it. And every time we think we've figured it out, some creature comes along and completely shatters our assumptions. I've always found it remarkable that some of the most sophisticated minds on this planet don't belong to humans in lab coats, but to animals hunting in American forests, patrolling city alleyways, swimming in coastal waters, and yes, even sitting on your living room couch. Today, we're going to look at 5 animals found in America that science has confirmed through rigorous study and repeated experimentation to be among the most intelligent creatures alive. And I want to be upfront about something before we begin. Intelligence isn't a single thing. It doesn't live in one test or one behavior. What I'll be looking at here is a combination of problem-solving ability, social cognition, memory, adaptability, and self-awareness, the full spectrum of what it truly means to be smart. So let's get into it. We'll start in the skies because the first animal on this list is one that I think most people genuinely underestimate. Ravens are found across much of North America, from the tundra of Alaska all the way down into the American Southwest. And for centuries, they've appeared in indigenous folklore as tricksters and symbols of wisdom. It turns out that reputation is more than just mythology. It's backed by science. Ravens belong to the corvid family, a group of birds that consistently outperform animals with much larger brains in cognitive tests, and the evidence for their intelligence is staggering. One of the most striking demonstrations of this came from a 2017 study published in the journal Science by researchers Kan Kabadai and Matthias Osvath at Lund University. They tested ravens on a task called the tube task, which requires an animal to understand cause and effect. Specifically, that dropping a stone into a tube will release a food reward. Ravens not only solved this, but they did so at a level that matched or exceeded that of adult great apes. But what truly set the ravens apart was their performance on a planning task. The birds were able to select and save a tool they would need later in exchange for a future food reward, demonstrating the ability to plan, a cognitive ability once thought to be uniquely human. What makes this even more extraordinary is that birds evolve their intelligence completely independently from mammals, meaning that the neural architecture of a raven's brain arrived at the same cognitive destination through an entirely different evolutionary path. Ravens also demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. Research by biologist Bernd Heinrich, who spent years studying wild ravens in Maine and Vermont, found that ravens use deception when caching food. They'll pretend to store food in one location to mislead rival ravens who might be watching. To do this successfully, a raven must understand that other individuals have minds of their own and that those minds can be manipulated. That's a genuinely remarkable level of social awareness for any animal. Moving from the skies to the sea, the next animal on this list will come as no surprise to most people, but the depth of the science behind it might. Bottlenose dolphins are found along both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of the United States, and they are arguably the most studied large-brained animals in the world after chimpanzees. One of the most significant discoveries in dolphin cognition came from research by psychologist Louis Herman at the University of Hawaii, who spent years training bottlenose dolphins to understand an artificial gestural language with strict grammatical rules. His dolphins could correctly interpret novel sentences they had never heard before, demonstrating an understanding not just of individual signals, but of syntax, the way the order of words changes meaning. This is a level of language comprehension that was for a long time assumed to be exclusive to humans and perhaps our closest primate relatives. But the discovery that cuts closest to the question of self-awareness came from the mirror test. In studies conducted by Diana Reese, a cognitive psychologist who has worked extensively with dolphins at institutions along the American coast, bottlenose dolphins were shown to recognize themselves in mirrors, marking their own bodies and inspecting the marks in the reflection. Only a small handful of species on Earth have passed this test, including great apes, elephants, and magpies. Every dolphin that passes it is, in a very real sense, demonstrating that it knows it exists as an individual. Dolphins also communicate using signature whistles, unique individually specific calls that function essentially as names. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences confirmed that dolphins not only use these calls to identify themselves, but they respond when they hear their own signature whistle played back to them, suggesting a level of individual identity that few animals possess. From the warm coastal waters of the Pacific, we move to something altogether more alien, and yet somehow just as intelligent. The Pacific giant octopus lives along the western coast of North America, from Alaska down to California. And it is, without question, one of the strangest cognitive stories in all of biology. Here is an animal with no skeleton, a lifespan of only 3 to 5 years, and a brain distributed across 9 semi-independent processing centers, 1 central brain and 1 in each of its 8 arms. And yet the octopus solves problems, navigates mazes, uses tools, plays, and appears to have individual personalities. Researcher Jennifer Mather at the University of Lethbridge was among the first to formally document play behavior in octopuses. A 2006 paper described octopuses repeatedly releasing objects into a current and catching them again, with no apparent survival purpose, which is widely considered a marker of cognitive sophistication in animals. In laboratory settings, octopuses have been observed opening child-proof pill bottles, disassembling equipment in their tanks, and escaping their enclosures at night to hunt in neighboring tanks before returning to their own. A level of spatial memory and planning that genuinely surprised the researchers who documented it. What makes octopus intelligence particularly fascinating is the evolutionary context. Unlike ravens and dolphins, octopuses are invertebrates. They share no close common ancestor with vertebrate intelligence. Their cognitive abilities evolved entirely in isolation, which tells us something profound. Complex intelligence is not some rare cosmic accident. Given the right ecological pressures, evolution will find it again and again in forms we never expected. We've looked at the sky and the sea, and now it's time to come back to land. Specifically to the edges of American cities, to the parks and alleyways and suburban forests where our next animal has quietly become one of the most successful large mammals in North America. The coyote is an animal that I think deserves far more intellectual credit than it receives. Originally native to the open plains of the American West, coyotes have expanded their range dramatically over the last century, colonizing every major urban center in the United States, including New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. This expansion is itself a testament to intelligence. It requires an animal to assess unfamiliar environments, learn new food sources, avoid new threats, and adapt social structures on the fly. Stanley Gert, a wildlife ecologist at Ohio State University, has led one of the longest-running studies of urban coyotes ever conducted, tracking hundreds of coyotes across the Chicago metropolitan area over more than 2 decades. His research found that urban coyotes shift their activity to be almost entirely nocturnal, specifically to avoid human contact, a learned behavioral change that happens within a single generation. They also navigate road networks with a sophistication that suggests genuine spatial mapping, using green corridors and underpasses with a consistency that implies deliberate route planning rather than random wandering. Coyotes are also exceptional social learners. Research has shown that coyotes can observe and replicate foraging techniques from other individuals, and that they adjust their behavior almost immediately in response to new threats. Attempts to control coyote populations through trapping and lethal removal have repeatedly failed, in part because surviving coyotes learn from these events and alter their behavior accordingly. It's a level of adaptive intelligence that has, frankly, made the coyote almost ungovernable, and you have to respect that, even if it's deeply inconvenient. And finally, we arrive at an animal that is, in many ways, the most extraordinary cognitive story of the entire video, and one that is sitting in millions of American homes right now. The Border Collie is a herding breed developed on the Anglo-Scottish border, and it has been selectively bred for centuries, not for size, aggression, or appearance, but purely for intelligence and trainability. The result is a dog that has demonstrated language comprehension abilities that have forced scientists to reconsider what non-human animals are capable of understanding. The most famous example in scientific literature is a border collie named Chaser, who lived with retired psychology professor John W. Pilley in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Over the course of several years of daily training and testing, Chaser learned the individual names of more than 1,022 objects, every single one verified through rigorous experimental controls. The research was published in the journal Behavioral Processes in 2011, and it made headlines around the world, because the scale of Chaser's vocabulary exceeded that of any non-human animal that had ever been tested. But the more significant finding wasn't the number. It was what Chaser could do with those words. She demonstrated an understanding of categories. She could distinguish between proper nouns and common nouns, understanding that ball referred to a class of objects and that blue ball referred to a specific one. She could also learn the name of a new object through a process researchers call fast mapping. By process of elimination, Chaser could identify a new unnamed object simply because it was the one she didn't already know. This is exactly the cognitive mechanism that human children use when acquiring language. And until Chaser, it had never been demonstrated in a non-human animal with such consistency. Another border collie named Rico, studied by Julian Kaminsky and colleagues and published in Science in 2004, showed similar abilities, suggesting that Chaser was not an isolated anomaly, but a representative of what this breed is genuinely capable of when allowed to learn.